Welcome to the European Parliamentary Research Service podcast on adequate minimum wages for EU workers.
A controversial proposal from the European Commission setting minimum wage standards for all EU countries is likely to continue hitting the headlines for years to come.
What some see as a tool to reduce wage inequality and in-work poverty, others see as too big an interference from Brussels. Want to know more? Stay with us.
The question of setting a minimum wage is certainly one of the most analysed and debated topics in economics, but has gained momentum in the context of the economic and social crisis that followed the COVID-19 pandemic.
Realising that many frontline workers such as nurses, carers, cleaners, waiters and agricultural workers earn the minimum wage has revamped the idea of a European minimum wage as a way to ensure fair wages and social inclusion and to help sustain domestic demand as our economies shrink.
But the idea is not a new one. In 2017, EU institutions jointly proclaimed the European Pillar of Social Rights, setting out the EU's commitment to fair wages for all workers. Since then, the European Commission has shown its willingness to address this issue.
But what is the situation regarding wages in Europe and how are they set? Let's have a look at that first.
Expressed in euros, monthly minimum wages vary widely across the EU, ranging from €312 in Bulgaria to €2,142 in Luxembourg in July 2020. This means that the highest minimum wage is almost 7 times that of the lowest.
However, the difference gets smaller when we factor in the cost of life in the different countries. So when considered in terms of purchasing power standards, the highest minimum wage in the EU was only 3 times higher than the lowest. But who sets wages in the EU?
Well, this is a direct competence of member states, but there's different ways to do it. Of the EU's 27 countries, 6 have wages set in collective bargaining between employers and trade unions, and 21 have statutory minimum wages set by governments.
But regardless of the way they're set, low pay remains a characteristic of employment in the EU. And what's even more worrying, the proportion of people who work but still face poverty increased from 8.3% in 2007 to 9.4% in 2018.
Determined to do something about this, in January 2020, the European Commission engaged in consultations with trade unions, employers' organisations and other social partners to gather their views on fair minimum wages for workers in the EU.
Concluding that action was highly needed, the Commission unveiled at the end of October its plans to ensure adequate minimum wages across the EU. Now, what does that mean exactly? Stay with us.
Let's start by clearing some common misunderstandings. The Commission proposal, which will have to be negotiated with Member States and the European Parliament in a lengthy process, does not oblige governments to set minimum wages by law, nor does it set the level of minimum wages.
What it does is simply laying out common rules for setting a minimum wage to ensure that all workers can earn a decent living and have access to minimum wage protection, either in the form of a statutory minimum wage or in the form of wages set by collective agreements.
In countries with a statutory minimum wage, which is to say in most EU member states, the Commission calls for a greater involvement of social partners in setting the minimum wage level. And for those relying on collective bargaining systems, so for example Sweden, Finland, Denmark, Austria, Italy and Cyprus, it wants to ensure that 70% of their workers are covered by such deals.
The Commission also wants to monitor and improve the enforcement of minimum wage protection in all countries. So how has the proposal been received by Member States and social and economic partners?
Supported by countries such as Germany and France as a way to stop wage-based competition between EU countries, the so-called social dumping, it has been met with scepticism from high-wage Nordic countries such as Denmark, Sweden and Finland, who fear a one-size-fits-all plan could undermine collective bargaining.
As you'd expect, trade union organisations have generally welcomed the proposal, while employers' organisations believe that wage setting should be left to social partners at national level.
And let's not forget that the European Parliament, who has long advocated a more inclusive economy, had called on the Commission to put forward a legal instrument to ensure that every worker in the Union has a fair minimum wage.
But the real negotiations begin now, and you can certainly expect them to be long and complex.
You're listening to the European Parliamentary Research Service podcasts.